Revenge in the Army. I was in the Army, and while away on a 4-day pass, my barracks room was broken into and a significant amount of my military equipment, helmet, backpack, weapons, web belt, ammo carrier, etc., was stolen, to the tune of approximately $800 in 1984 dollars. When L returned, there were tool marks on the locked room door and it was clearly a break-in. I notified my platoon sergeant and first sergeant, and they said to call the military police. Then the company commander/commanding officer, who outranked us, called me and stated he didn't want the break-in being reported to the military police because then our company would show up in the higher level, division, police blotter, and this would make him, the company commander/commanding officer, CO, look bad. So he told me to do a report of survey, a form used to be reimbursed for lost equipment, and L wouldn't have to pay for the stolen equipment, whose replacement costs were a month's pay. Well, L submitted the paperwork, and without the police report, my request to be reimbursed was denied and L was told L would have to pay for all the stolen equipment. I was shocked because it was a lot of money and L was just about to leave the Army to go back to college. I needed that money to survive. The CO told me that was a tough break and there was nothing he could do to help me, even though it was his orders L had followed. Well, turns out, just a week before we found out that division would not replace my stolen equipment, L had led our company through a nuclear, biological and chemical weapons evaluation exercise. That was my specialty in the Army, and the spineless CO sat out the exercise and just observed. This placed me in a leadership position to do his job, while a captain from our division HQ graded our actions. I was a junior sergeant who had to maneuver, lead and direct the whole company of 120 men, including senior lieutenants, to a staging area 5 miles away, through the security procedures to secure the decontamination site and then lead the cleaning of our men, tanks and equipment from the simulated chemical attack. I had never maneuvered an armored company before, but L did it, and the other sergeants and lieutenants in the unit were shocked that the CO hadn't helped me during the exercise. The process went well, and at the end, a captain from division who was evaluating us congratulated me on doing a good job. In front of the company, this captain then explained our next steps we would do. He made a mistake and told the troops wrong information, that in combat would get them killed. I was leaving the Army, but L cared enough about my fellow soldiers to want them to be combat proficient. So politely and respectfully L corrected what the captain had said, but he clearly resented me making him look silly. I guess he was embarrassed a lower-ranking soldier corrected him and that made him noticeably embarrassed. At the end of the debriefing, L was walking back to my armored vehicle to radio our HQ that now we had completed our decontamination, a requirement of the exercise, and were operational again, and this captain followed me, away from the other soldiers. He asked what L was going to do, and L told him L was about to make the radio call to HQ, and he told me that wouldn't be necessary, L could just tell him what L would say. I told him and he told me our unit had passed the evaluation. Luckily for me, my first sergeant overheard him say this to me. Now fast forward to where L find out that my equipment would not be replaced, and a couple days later, L was called into the CO's office with my first sergeant and told our company had flunked the training evaluation because L hadn't made that radio call. I was getting out of the Army, so didn't really care, but it was bad news for my CO. I was shocked because the other captain, who outranked me, told me not to make the radio call that our unit was decontaminated and operational again. Turns out that the captain was immature and mad at me since L had embarrassed him in front of all the soldiers in my unit. I still was angry at the CO for ordering me not to call the police about my barracks room break-in, and how he didn't care that L would now have to pay a lot of money to replace my stolen equipment. So L didn't defend myself or tell the CO what really happened with the evaluation or that captain. When I left the CO's office, the first sergeant told me he heard the other captain tell me not to make that radio call, but not to say anything. Our CO was a jerk who would get us all killed in a war, and his unit flunking the evaluation made him look really bad, so he asked me to keep my mouth shut. A couple weeks later, the CO was rude to a sick soldier in our unit, while L was out processing to leave the Army. Everyone hated him even more for this. So our supply sergeant, who was retiring from the Army, and after the CO signed for all the military equipment in the supply room, told me he couldn't believe the CO had screwed me over on my stolen equipment and that he would help me. So he handed me the keys to the supply room that the CO hadn't collected, and told me to take whatever military equipment L would need to replace my stolen equipment, since the CO was now responsible to replace everything in the supply room with his money. He also apologized that some of the replacement equipment L would need was not in the supply room, and he felt bad L would still have to pay a couple $100s out of pocket to replace some of the stolen equipment. The supply sergeant also answered my questions about where all the backup training logs for our unit's weapons and physical training tests were kept. We were about to be inspected by higher headquarters, and these records were super important for the CO to pass the inspection and be promoted and not be kicked out of the Army. The day before L got out of the Army with an honorable discharge, and just a couple days before this huge important inspection, it was discovered that the whole company's year's worth of weapons training records, the backup records and electronic records were missing or wiped clean. The CO had to explain this embarrassing situation to his bosses, who were not happy with him. His unit had already flunked the NBC evaluation, and now his unit had failed to properly maintain training records. Even worse, his unit's training budget was completely over budget, with costs off the charts, and the division had to come up with a lot of money to cover the ammo costs to requalify the whole company on all our weapons, plus time from other duties to redo our physical tests, PT, of running, push-ups etc. Just as bad, Advanced training would have to be cancelled to redo all the basic weapons qualification training that had to be completed once again. There was no way the CO could avoid receiving a bad performance appraisal, which would end any chance of him getting promoted, thus effectively ending his military career. Meanwhile, my fellow soldiers loved it because they liked to shoot machine guns, throw grenades, shoot cannons, etc. My last day in the army, at morning formation, as everyone was getting ready to do the makeup PT test and later all day doing makeup weapon qualifications for several more days, my awesome first sergeant told me that the disappearing records was the best ETS, end term of service, prank he had ever seen. I of course replied that L didn't know what he was talking about. He laughed, winked at me and told me L was a good soldier and that he would miss me. He then shook my hand and wished me well.